Hello, welcome. Today we'll be reading about political dangers. It's my headset. I think we're okay. Political Dangers, period, by Henry George, published in 1883. This is after he wrote Progress and Poverty, where he espoused the land value tax. Let's see what he has to say about political dangers and if it is applicable to today in the American Republic. The American Republic is today unquestionably the foremost of the nations of the leader of modern civilization. Of all the great peoples of the European family, her people are the most homogeneous, the most active, and most assimilative. Their average standard of intelligence and comfort is higher. They have most fully adopted modern industrial improvements and are the quickest to utilize discovery and invention. Their political institutions are most in accordance with modern ideas. Their position exempts them from dangers and difficulties besetting the European nations, and a vast area of unoccupied land gives them room to grow. At the rate of increase so far maintained, the English-speaking people of America will, by the close of the century, number nearly 100 million, a population as large as owned the sway of Rome in her palmiest days. By the middle of the next century, a time which children now born will live to see, they will at the same rate number more than the present population of Europe, and by its close nearly equal the population which, at the beginning of this century, the whole earth was believed to contain. We did not create as many people as George thought. Uh, Also, his claims about the American Republic. Albert J. Nock, a later Georgist, the father of libertarianism, uh, he seemed, in his memoirs that I've been reading, he seemed to think that economism, yeah, his term, Albert J. Nock's term, that America was dominated by economism, and economism was uh, valuing the productive capacity of a human more than anything else, roughly speaking. And he said that that dominated America in a negative way, more so than other nations in Europe, such as France or Belgium, maybe. Anyway, the business of America is business. George continues, but the increase of power is more rapid than the increase of population, and goes on in accelerating progression. Discovery and invention stimulate discovery and invention, and it is only when we consider that the industrial progress of the last 50 years bids fair. The last year bids fair, I guess that's saying like farewell, I don't know, bids fair to pale before the achievements of the next, that we can vaguely imagine the future that seems opening before the American people. The center of wealth, of art, of luxury, and learning must pass to this side of the Atlantic even before the center of population. It seems as if this continent had been reserved, shrouded for ages from the rest of the world, as the field upon which European civilization might freely bloom. And for the very reason that our growth is so rapid and our progress so swift, and for the very reason that all the tendencies of modern civilization assert themselves here more quickly and strongly than anywhere else, the problems which modern civilization must meet will here first fully present themselves, and will most imperiously demand to be thought out or fought out. It is It is still hard to imagine a war on home soil here, but it is difficult for anyone to turn from the history of the past to think of the incomparable greatness promised by the rapid growth of the United States without something of awe, something of that feeling which induced Amasis of Egypt to dissolve his alliance with the successful Polycrates, because the gods do not permit to mortals such prosperity. Of this at least we may be certain: the rapidity of our development brings dangers that can be guarded against only by alert intelligence and earnest patriotism. There is a suggestive fact that must impress anyone who thinks over the history of past eras and preceding civilizations. The great, wealthy, and powerful nations have always lost their freedom. It is only in small, poor, and isolated communities that liberty has been maintained. I wish you would provide some examples of what countries he's speaking of. Does he consider, the Netherlands or Denmark? I mean, by modern standards, with the millions of peoples in those countries, tens of millions, you can't really. We might consider them small now, but compared to Georgia's time, that's very large, and they're not very isolated. So I don't know who he's talking about. So true is this that the poets have all, and I guess maybe just talking more primitive, maybe I don't know. That the poets have always sung that liberty loves the rocks and the mountains, that she shrinks from wealth and power and splendor, from the crowded city and the busy mart. Yeah, there's this blogger named Simon Saris who lives on his own in his house that he built with his wife and kids and gardens and stuff, and he lives in New Hampshire in the sticks, and he is always talking about how culture is created in the country and then goes to the city and dies. And I don't think that he's got that right. Yet there is a great I don't know. Cities are a blessing and a curse the way that they've been so far in human society. I don't know. So true is this that philosophical historians have sought in the richness of material resources the causes of the corruption and enslavement of peoples. Liberty is natural. What does natural mean, George? What does natural mean? Primitive perceptions are of the equal rights of the citizen, and political organization always starts from this base. It is as social development goes on that we find power concentrating and institutions based upon the equality of rights, passing into institutions which make the many slaves of the few. How this is, we may see. Again, I think these underlinings are probably from Dan Sullivan, a Georgist of some repute. How this is in all institutions which involve the lodgment of governing power, there is with social growth a tendency to the exaltation of their function and the centralization of their power, and in the stronger of these institutions a tendency to the absorption of the powers of the rest. Yes, well, this is very much what Albert J. Nock whines about, and I haven't even read his book, Our Enemy, the State. But centralized power is definitely not something George was crazy about, and so those who think that he was sort of socialist, or that Georgism sounds, smacks of socialism, I just other than being for the social good and wanting the working class to receive their just reward of their labor, and by working class I mean anybody who works, but the idea of a central planning agency, very, very antagonistic or antithetical to Georgism. And as numbers increase and the power and importance of each become less and less as compared with that of all, So for this reason does government tend to pass beyond the scrutiny and control of the masses. The leader of a handful of warriors or headman of a little village can command or govern only by common consent, and anyone aggrieved can readily appeal to his fellows. But when the tribe becomes a nation and the village expands to a populous country, the powers of the chieftain without formal addition become practically much greater. For with increase of numbers, scrutiny of his action becomes more difficult. It is harder and harder successfully to appeal from them, and the aggregate power which he directs becomes irresistible as against individuals. And gradually, as power thus concentrates, primitive ideas are lost, and the habit of thought grows up, which regards the masses as born but for the service of their rulers. I think you can say very similar things about large corporations and the tendency of large corporations to coagulate and metastasize. Definitely have their roots in land monopoly and perhaps other policies set up by the plutocracy, the rule by the rich. Thus, the mere growth of society involves danger of the gradual conversion of government into something independent of and beyond the people, and the gradual seizure of its powers by a ruling class, though not necessarily a class marked off by personal titles and a hereditary status, for as history shows, personal titles and hereditary status do not accompany the concentration of power, but follow it. I did see an infographic that said that this was the first election since like 1976 or something that did not contain a Clinton, a Bush, or a Cheney. Because all of those families had at least a couple members, two Bush brothers, and a Mr. and Mrs. Cheney. Was there another Cheney? Wait, was it Cheney? I don't know. Maybe it was just Dick Cheney that was the one that connected people. The same, yeah, which means our presidency is. It definitely seems that one person becomes president and then their offspring and relatives then have a much higher chance of getting elected, clearly. The same methods which, in a little town where each knows his neighbor and matters of common interest are under the common eye, enable the citizens freely to govern themselves. They may, in a great city, as we have in many cases seen, enable an organized ring of plunderers to gain and hold the government. So too, as we see in Congress and even in our state legislatures, the growth of the country and the greater number of interests make the proportion of the votes of a representative, of which his constituents know or care to know, less and less. It's like George knew about rational ignorance. And so too, the executive and judicial departments tend constantly to pass beyond the scrutiny of the people. I don't know if I'll study the judiciary and theory. Like, I don't have strong opinions about how one ought to go about being a judge or picking judges. I don't think I'm going to look into that anytime soon. That is just an area where I am not highly learned. But to the changes produced by growth are, with us, added the changes brought about by improved industrial methods. The tendency of steam and of machinery is to the division of labor, to the concentration of wealth and power. Workmen are becoming massed by hundreds and thousands in the employ of single individuals and firms. Small storekeepers and merchants are becoming the clerks and salesmen of great business houses. We have already corporations whose revenues and payrolls belittle those of the greatest states. And with this concentration grows the facility of combination among these great business interests. I'm tempted to go on a big uh, tangent about startup culture and startup businesses and corporation formation and patents, but I won't. George continues, how and how this country goes to facility of combination among these great business interests. How readily the railroad companies, the coal operators, the steel producers, even the match manufacturers combine, either to regulate prices or to use the powers of government. The tendency in all branches of industry is to the formation of rings against which the individual is helpless and which exert their power upon government whenever their interests may thus be served. Interesting. This may be leading into where all the antitrust, anti-monopoly, uh, Georgist behavior like sprouts from, like trust busting rather than simply trusting, simply relying on the market after providing financial justice through the land value tax. Because my position is you get rid of landlordism, you implement the land value tax, and then you need to reform the definition of a corporation and why the government grants these sort of privileged status, weird set of rights to people who form a corporation. And then you wouldn't need to mess around with any trust busting, but I don't know. It is not merely positively but negatively that great aggregations of wealth, whether individual or corporate, tend to corrupt government and take it out of the control of the masses of the people. Nothing is more timorous than $1 million except $2 million. Timorous meaning similar to Tim, full of apprehension, timid, fearful of danger, timid, deficient in courage, similar, timid. I might have guessed as much. Great wealth always supports the party in power, no matter how corrupt it may be. It never exerts itself for reform, for it instinctively fears change. It never struggles against misgovernment. When threatened by the holders of political power, it does not agitate nor appeal to the people, it buys them off. Yep. Why would the wealthy want things to change? They, it's nice to be wealthy, and the wealthy know it's not nice to be not wealthy. It is in this way no less than by its direct interference that aggregated wealth corrupts government and helps to make politics a trade. Our organized lobbies, both legislative and congressional, relies much upon the fears as upon the hopes of moneyed interest. Yes, this is what he's talking about, fears. I mean, I get that from George. Want and the fear of want dictating behavior. When business is dull, their resource is to get up a bill which some money interests will pay them to beat. So too, these large moneyed interests will subscribe to political funds on the principle of keeping on the right side of those in power. Just as the railroad company's deadhead President Arthur when he goes to Florida to fish. The more corrupt a government, the easier wealth can use it. Where legislation is to be bought, the rich make the laws. Where justice is to be purchased, the rich have the ear of the courts. And if, for this reason, great wealth does not absolutely prefer corrupt government to pure government, it becomes none the less a corrupting influence. A community composed of very rich and very poor falls an easy prey to whoever can seize power. The very poor have not spirit and intelligence enough to resist. The very rich have too much at stake. The rise in the United States of monstrous fortunes, the aggregation of enormous wealth in the hands of corporations, necessarily implies the loss by the people of governmental control. Democratic forms may be maintained, but there can be as much tyranny and misgovernment under democratic forms as any other. In fact, they lend themselves most readily to tyranny and misgovernment. Forms count for little. The Romans, see, I don't know. I don't know. I so want to just believe that a system can be designed, basically sortition government, that would repel this. Because I don't think people, uh, I think they're driven by the fear of want and actually being in want more than they are driven by uh, some desire to just have 1,000 cars in their garage. And so, if you can account for their incentives, I feel like you should be able to design around it. I don't know. I just, if there's hope, it seems like that has to be in a sortition government. But there may not be hope. But if there might be hope, then there is hope. All right. The Romans expelled their kings and continued to abhor the very name of king, but under the name of Caesars and imperators, that at first meant no more than our boss, they crouched before tyrants more absolute than kings. We have already, under the popular name of bosses, developed political Caesars in municipalities and states. If this development continues in time, there will come a national boss. What is Donald Trump if not that? We are young, but we are growing. The day may arrive when the boss of America will be to the modern world what Caesar was to the Roman world. This at least is certain. Democratic government in more than name can exist only where wealth is distributed with something like equality. Where the great mass of citizens are personally free and independent, neither fettered by their poverty nor made subject by their wealth. There is, after all, some sense in a property qualification. How funny. The man who is dependent on a master, yeah, this was the big argument when there was when ballots weren't secret in this, in nascent America. The big argument for not letting people for requiring voters to own property. The big argument was that those who don't own property are subject completely to the will of the landlord. So it was basically small landlords were afraid of big landlords dominating all of their tenants' votes and having more political power than they had. And then, then the vote was made secret, but in some sense, that didn't really help much. You go into that in more detail, but the man who is dependent on a master for his living is not a free man. To give the suffrage to slaves is only to give votes to their owners. That universal suffrage may add to, instead of decreasing, the political power of wealth we see when mill owners and mine operators vote their hands. I think this just means the mill owners and mine owners just get to decide what their workers vote. The freedom to earn, without fear or favor, a comfortable living ought to go with the freedom to vote. Thus alone can a sound basis for republican institutions be secured. How can a man be said to have a country where he has no right to a square inch of soil, where he has nothing but his hands, and urged by starvation must bid against his fellows for the privilege of using them? When it comes to voting tramps, Some principle has been carried to a ridiculous and dangerous extreme. I have known elections to be decided by the carting of paupers from the almshouse to the polls, but such decisions can scarcely be in the interest of good government. Beneath all political problems lies the social problem of the distribution of wealth. This our people do not generally recognize, and they listen to quacks who propose to cure the symptoms without touching the disease. Let us elect good men to office, say the quacks. Yes, let us catch little birds by sprinkling salt on their tails. I don't know what that means. It behooves us to look facts in the face. The experiment of popular government in the United States is clearly a failure. Not that it is a failure everywhere and in everything. An experiment of this kind does not have to be fully worked out to be proved a failure. But speaking generally of the whole country, from the Atlantic to the Pacific and from the lakes to the Gulf, our government by the people has in large degree become, is in larger degree becoming, government by the strong and unscrupulous. Henry George. I want to see when he ran for office again. Um, he tried to get in the state assembly in '69. He campaigned for Irwin. He was nominated but didn't seem to get elected in 1881. So remember, he published Progress and Poverty '79, and then he wrote this, Social Problems, in '83. In '86, he campaigned for mayor of New York City. And I know, so this was, yeah. So I know that this was like, he was somewhat reticent to do this. From reading Land and Liberty by Christopher England, and they like came to him with 30,000 signatures, something like that. I don't know. And here he was campaigning for New York mayor in '97. He died a little bit before the election, but he like wasn't super likely to win it. And then he had a whole bunch of people come to his funeral. The people, of course, continue to vote, but the people are losing their power. Money and organization tell more and more in elections. In some sections, bribery has become chronic, and numbers of voters expect regularly to sell their votes. Even, I think there has been a fair number of actual crackdown on, like, I don't know how it's called, naive, vanilla, simple corruption and bribery, but I think we've just sort of enshrined more corruption in regulatory bureaucracy. Like, there's just so many legal ways, redlining and registration issues and these legal ways of. But even if all the voting were totally straightforward, you can't escape the game theory behind voting. Anyway, let's keep going. And some say large employers regularly bulldoze their hands, again, I think this means their employees, into voting as they wish. In municipal, state, and federal politics, the power of the machine is increasing. In many places, it has become so strong that the ordinary citizen has no more influence in the government under which he lives than he would have in China. He is, in reality, not one of the governing classes, but one of the governed. He occasionally, in disgust, votes for the other man or the other party. Yes, the spite vote. And of course, there's a lot to be said about the game theory behind that, and yeah. But generally, to find that he has effected only a change of masters or secured the same masters under different names, and he is beginning to accept the situation and to leave politics to politicians as something with which an honest, self-respecting man cannot afford to meddle. We are steadily differentiating a governing class, or rather a class of Praetorians, who make a business of gaining political power and then selling it. The type of the rising party leader is not the orator or statesman of an earlier day, but the shrewd manager who knows how to handle the workers, how to combine pecuniary interests, how to obtain money and to spend it, how to gather to himself followers and to secure their allegiance. One party machine is becoming complementary to the other party machine. The politicians, like the railroad managers, having discovered that combination pays better than competition, so rings are made impregnable, and great pecuniary interests secure their ends no matter how elections go. There are sovereign states so completely in the hands of rings and corporations that it seems as if nothing short of a revolutionary uprising of the people could dispossess them. Indeed, whether the general government has not already passed beyond popular control may be doubted. Certain it is that possession of the general government has for some time past secured possession. Sorry. Certain it is that possession of the general government has for some time past secured possession. Never mind, I take back my apology. I think that's just a confusing sentence. You can explain that one to me in the comments. And for one term at least, the presidential chair has been occupied by a man not elected to it. This, of course, was largely due to the crookedness of the man who was elected and to the lack of principle in his supporters. Nevertheless, it occurred. I don't know what event in history he's talking about. Um, I mean, talking about Lincoln assassinating and Lincoln being assassinated and who took over? I don't. Well, I guess we should know that. We're Americans. That's our history. I'm American. You may not be. Who became president after Lincoln? Oh, Andrew Johnson. Okay. Don't know much about him. Uh, as for the great railroad managers, they may well say, the people be. We have no idea what could be in there. Wow, George busting out the language. The people be damned. When they want the power of the people, they buy the people's masters. The map of the United States is colored to show states and territories. A map of real political powers would ignore state lines. Here would be a big patch representing the domains of Vanderbilt. There, Jay Gould's dominions would be brightly marked. In another place would be set off the empire of Stanford and Huntington. In another, the newer empire of Henry Villard. Oh, never heard of that guy. The states and parts of states that own the sway of the Pennsylvania Central would be distinguished from those ruled by the Baltimore and Ohio, and so on. In our national Senate, sovereign members of the Union are supposed to be represented. But what are more truly represented are railroad kings and great moneyed interests. Though occasionally a mine jobber from Nevada or Colorado, not inimical to the ruling powers, is suffered to buy himself a seat for glory. Yeah, and again, jobber, a um, common term in the old political discourse. A middleman and one that buys merchandise from manufacturers and sells it to retailers, one that works by job or contract. What is jobber? What does jobber mean in old political jargon? Yes. In old political jargon, a jobber referred to a person who used political influence or connections to secure jobs, contracts, or other benefits, often for personal gain or the affecting of allies. They gave people jobs. They hooked them up. Um, A jobber gets himself a seat for glory. And the bench, as well as the Senate, is being filled with corporation henchmen. A railroad king makes his attorney a judge of last resort, as the great lord used to make his chaplain a bishop. We do not get even cheap government. We might keep a royal family, house them in palaces like Versailles or Sans Souci, provide them with what sense? We can't. We don't have time to look up everything. Provide them with courts and guards, masters of robes and rangers of parks. Let them give balls more costly than Mrs. Vanderbilt's and build yachts finer than Jay Gould's, for much less than is wasted and stolen under our nominal government of the people. What a noble income would be that of a Duke of New York, a Marquis of Philadelphia, or a Count of San Francisco, who would administer the government of these municipalities for 50% of present waste and stealage. What a noble income would be that of blah, 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 who would administer the government of these municipalities for 50% of present waste and stealage. Unless we got an aesthetic Chinook, where could we get an absolute ruler who would erect such a monument of extravagant vulgarity as the new capital of the state of New York? We could look that one up. New York State Capitol building. Yeah, looks pretty glorious in Albany. I don't know when that one was built, but anyway, I assume it's the same one. Well, as we saw in the Congress just adjourned, the benevolent gentlemen whose desire is to protect us against the pauper labor of Europe quarrel over their respective shares of the spoil with as little regard for the taxpayer as a pirate crew would have for the consignees of a captured vessel. The people are largely conscious of all this, and there is among the masses much dissatisfaction. But there is a lack of that intelligent interest necessary to adapt political organization to changing conditions. The popular idea of reform seems to be merely a change of men or a change of parties, not a change of system. Political children, we attribute to bad men or wicked parties what really springs from deep general causes. Our two great political parties have really nothing more to propose than the keeping or the taking of the offices from the other party. On their outskirts are the greenbackers who, with a more or less definite idea of what they want to do with the currency, represent vague social dissatisfaction. This is about gold standard, silver, whatever, and going to fiat currency. George was sympathetic to the greenbacker cause, from what I've read. Civil service reformers who hope to accomplish a political reform while keeping it out of politics, and anti-monopolists who propose to tie up locomotives with pack thread. Interesting, maybe he thinks that the anti-monopoly movement is a little bit off base. If yeah, like degrowthers. Even the labor organizations seem to fear to go further in their or oh, maybe he's saying maybe pack thread is really weak, and so the people who this is just going to be ineffective at fighting the monopolists. Even the labor organizations, I guess we could look up pack thread, but you can tell me in the comments. Even the labor organizations seem to fear to go further in their platforms than some such propositions as 8-hour laws, bureaus of labor statistics, mechanics liens, and prohibition of prison contracts. All this, I think, if this means what I think it means, getting rid of prison labor, this is like similar to our Prop 5 in California, which I think is not passing. I think it's Prop 5. No, Prop 5 was on bonds. There was another prop about like compulsory labor for inmates. I don't know, but that's slave labor. All this shows want of grasp and timidity of thought. It is not by accident that government grows corrupt and passes out of the hands of the people. If we would really make and continue this a government of the people, for the people, and by the people, we must give to our politics earnest attention. We must look at man as they are, as Albert J. Nock is fond of quoting some really some judge from way long ago. Look at man as they are, and that is with the population our size, your influence by just paying earnest attention is so minuscule, it is not worth doing. The only solution is something game theoretic that aligns your incentives. It must be sortition. Yeah. We must be prepared to review our opinions, to give up old ideas and to accept new ones. We must abandon prejudice and make our reckoning with free minds. Like, only once it's to the point of revolution can you actually get enough of the masses to really care. I don't know. I'm making crazy statements. The sailor, who no matter how the wind might change, should persist in keeping his vessel under the same sail and on the same tack, would never reach his haven. All right. Political dangers. Dangeresque. Like, subscribe, share, follow, tell everyone you know about Henry George, and also about sortition.